David pushed his cleaning cart down the empty hallway of Tech Vision Industries. The wheels squeaked softly against the polished marble floor. It was 11:30 p.m., and the massive office building was almost completely dark. Only the emergency lights glowed, casting long shadows across the corporate lobby. For the past 3 years, David had walked these same halls every night. He knew every corner, every office, every stain that needed extra attention. The executives who worked here during the day had no idea who cleaned their offices. To them, the building just magically stayed spotless. David preferred it that way. He could work in peace, think his own thoughts, and avoid the awkward conversations that came when people learned about his past. At 34 years old, David had already lived 2 completely different lives. The first life ended abruptly 15 years ago, when civil war tore through his home country of Somalia. The second life began when he stepped off a plane in San Francisco, with nothing but a worn suitcase and a head full of knowledge that seemed worthless in his new world. Tonight felt different, though. David couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. Maybe it was the storm clouds gathering outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, or maybe it was the phone call he'd received earlier from his old colleague in London, asking if he was still interested in translating some documents. He parked his cart outside the break room and pulled out his phone. It was the perfect time to make his weekly calls. The break room had the best signal in the building, and more importantly, it was far enough from the security desk that nobody would overhear him. David dialed the first number. His friend in Beijing answered after 2 rings. Wei? His voice switched effortlessly into Mandarin Chinese. They talked about the recent changes in China's economic policies. David found himself discussing complex financial theories, the kind of conversations that reminded him of his university days. His friend was struggling with some research about international trade agreements, and David helped him work through the complicated details. After 20 minutes, David hung up and immediately dialed another number. This time a young woman in Paris answered. David's voice transformed again, this time flowing in perfect French. She was preparing for her final exams in international literature, and David had been helping her for months. They discussed the themes in African Francophone novels, analyzing how different authors approached the concept of cultural identity. The conversation in French lasted about 15 minutes before David switched to his next call. A businessman in Madrid needed help preparing for a presentation. David spoke to him in Spanish, offering advice about cultural nuances that might help him connect better with his potential clients from Mexico. By the time David finished his Spanish conversation, it was nearly midnight. But he wasn't done yet. His phone buzzed with a text message from someone in Brazil. David called back and spent 10 minutes speaking Portuguese, helping translate some legal documents for a small business owner who was expanding into Europe. What David didn't know was that across the building, someone else was still awake. Robert Harrison sat in his corner office on the 50th floor, staring at the presentation slides he'd forgotten to review. Tomorrow morning, he had to present to a group of Japanese investors who were considering a $50 million partnership with his company. As the CEO of Tech Vision Industries, Robert was used to high-pressure situations, but tonight his mind felt foggy. The stress of running a tech company worth billions of dollars was catching up with him. Robert had built his empire from nothing. 20 years ago, he was just another ambitious programmer with big dreams. Now at 45, he commanded respect from world leaders and business moguls. His company employed over 10,000 people across 6 countries. Yet sitting alone in his office at midnight, he felt the weight of every decision resting on his shoulders. He rubbed his tired eyes and decided to grab some coffee from the break room. The executive kitchen on his floor was locked, but he remembered seeing a coffee machine near the elevators on the lower floors. Robert loosened his tie and walked toward the elevator bank. As the elevator descended, Robert thought about tomorrow's presentation. The Japanese investors were particularly difficult to impress. They valued respect, attention to detail, and cultural understanding. One wrong move could cost his company millions of dollars. The elevator doors opened on the 15th floor and Robert stepped out. The break room was just around the corner, but as he approached, he heard something unexpected. Someone was speaking in what sounded like a foreign language. The voice was coming from inside the break room. Robert slowed his pace and listened more carefully. The voice belonged to a man. and he was speaking what Robert recognized as Arabic. Robert had studied several languages in college and during his international business travels. This wasn't casual conversation. The man was discussing something sophisticated, something that required deep knowledge and education. Robert reached the break room doorway and peered inside. A tall, lean black man in a janitorial uniform sat at one of the plastic tables, holding a phone to his ear. The man's back was turned to the door, so he didn't notice Robert standing there. The conversation continued in Arabic for several more minutes. Robert caught words and phrases that suggested they were discussing economics and political theory. This wasn't someone calling home to chat with family. This was an intellectual discussion between educated people. Then something remarkable happened. The man in the janitor uniform ended his Arabic conversation and immediately dialed another number. When someone answered, he began speaking in what Robert was certain was Russian. The transition was seamless, like switching channels on a television. Robert found himself frozen in the doorway, completely captivated by what he was witnessing. The janitor's Russian was just as fluent as his Arabic had been. He was discussing literature, specifically Russian authors from the 19th century. Robert could only catch pieces of the conversation, but it was clear that this man possessed extensive knowledge about Tolstoy and Dostoevsky. After the Russian call ended, the janitor immediately made another call. This time Robert heard Italian flowing from the man's lips. The conversation seemed to be about Renaissance art and its influence on modern European culture. Robert's business mind started racing. In all his years of international business, he had rarely encountered someone with such linguistic abilities. Most professional translators specialized in 2 or 3 languages at most. But this man seemed to speak each language like a native speaker. The Italian conversation ended and Robert heard the janitor dialing again. This time, when someone answered, the man began speaking German. The topic shifted to engineering and technological innovation. Robert was fluent enough in German to understand that they were discussing advanced manufacturing techniques. By now, Robert had counted at least 5 different languages. His amazement grew with each conversation. This wasn't just someone who had picked up a few phrases from different countries. This man was conducting complex intellectual discussions in multiple languages with the ease of a seasoned diplomat. Robert checked his watch. It was almost 12:30 a.m. He had completely forgotten about the coffee he came to get. Instead, he found himself witnessing something that challenged everything he thought he knew about the people who worked in his building. The German conversation ended, and Robert heard the janitor making one more call. This time, the language was one Robert didn't recognize at all. It sounded complex and musical, with sounds that seemed to flow together in ways that European languages didn't. Whatever language it was, the janitor spoke it with the same confidence and fluency he had demonstrated with all the others. Robert realized he was eavesdropping, but he couldn't bring himself to walk away. In 30 years of business, he had never encountered anyone with this level of linguistic skill. The man sitting in his company's break room, wearing a simple janitor's uniform, possessed abilities that most international corporations would pay enormous sums to access. The final conversation ended, and Robert heard the janitor putting his phone away. Footsteps approached the doorway. Robert quickly stepped back into the shadows, not wanting to embarrass the man by revealing that he had been listening. The janitor emerged from the break room, pushing his cleaning cart. In the dim emergency lighting, Robert got his first clear look at the man's face. He appeared to be in his 30s with intelligent eyes and a thoughtful expression. There was something about his posture and bearing that suggested education and refinement, qualities that seemed at odds with his current occupation. As the janitor disappeared around the corner, Robert stood alone in the hallway, his mind spinning with questions. Who was this man? How had someone with such extraordinary abilities ended up working the night shift as a cleaner? And most importantly, what was Robert going to do with this information? Robert had built his fortune by recognizing opportunities that others missed. Tonight he had stumbled upon what might be the most remarkable opportunity of his career. The question was whether he had the courage to act on it. Robert barely slept that night. He kept thinking about the janitor who spoke all those languages. By morning, he had made a decision. He needed to talk to this man, but he had to do it carefully. He didn't want to embarrass him or make him feel like he was in trouble. The next day dragged on forever. Robert sat through his presentation with the Japanese investors. but his mind kept wandering. He found himself wondering what the janitor's story was. How does someone end up cleaning offices when they can speak so many languages fluently? The Japanese meeting went well enough. They agreed to move forward with preliminary discussions, which was better than Robert had hoped for. But even this good news couldn't distract him from his curiosity about the night janitor. As evening approached, Robert made an excuse to stay late at the office. He told his assistant he had some important calls to make with clients in different time zones. It wasn't exactly a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. By 11 p.m., the building was mostly empty. Robert took the elevator down to the 15th floor and waited. He felt nervous, which was unusual for him. He had negotiated billion-dollar deals with some of the toughest business leaders in the world. But somehow this conversation felt more important. Around 11:20, he heard the familiar squeak of cartwheels coming down the hallway. Robert took a deep breath and walked toward the sound. The janitor was cleaning one of the conference rooms, carefully wiping down the long mahogany table. "Excuse me," Robert said softly, not wanting to startle him. The janitor looked up, surprised to see anyone else in the building so late. His expression immediately became cautious, the way employees look when they think they might be in trouble. "Yes, sir? Is there something wrong with my work?" The janitor's voice carried a slight accent, but his English was perfect and formal. "No, nothing wrong at all," Robert said quickly. "I'm Robert Harrison, the CEO. I was wondering if I could ask you a few questions." The janitor straightened up, clearly nervous now. "Of course, Mr. Harrison, is there a problem?" Robert gestured toward two chairs near the conference table. "Would you mind sitting down for a moment? This isn't about your work performance. I'm just curious about something." The janitor looked uncertain but sat down carefully, perching on the edge of his chair like he was ready to jump up at any moment. Robert sat across from him, trying to appear as non-threatening as possible. "I don't even know your name," Robert began. "David, sir. David Osman." "David, I was here late last night and I happened to walk past the break room while you were making some phone calls. I couldn't help but notice that you were speaking several different languages." David's face went pale. "I'm sorry, sir. I know I'm not supposed to use my phone during work hours. It won't happen again." No, Robert said quickly. "You're not in trouble." I was amazed by what I heard. "How many languages do you speak?" David looked confused by the question. 9 languages fluently, sir. A few others at a conversational level." Robert sat back in his chair. Even though he had suspected this, hearing it confirmed still shocked him. 9 languages. That's incredible. What's your background, David? For a long moment, David didn't answer. He seemed to be weighing whether to trust Robert with his story. Finally, he spoke. "I was a professor back in Somalia, sir. I taught linguistics at the National University in Mogadishu. I had a PhD from Oxford University in England." Robert's eyes widened. "You have a PhD from Oxford?" "Yes, sir. I studied comparative linguistics and international relations. I spoke 6 languages when I started my doctorate, and I learned 3 more while I was there." "What happened? How did you end up—" Robert gestured around the office building. David's expression grew distant. "The civil war in Somalia got worse in 2010. The university was bombed. Several of my colleagues were killed. I had to leave everything behind and come to America as a refugee." Robert felt a knot forming in his stomach. He was beginning to understand the scope of what had happened to this man. "When I arrived here 15 years ago, I had nothing," David continued. "My degree wasn't recognized by American universities. I tried to get it validated, but the process was complicated and expensive. I needed to work immediately just to survive." "But surely with your language skills you could have found work as a translator or interpreter." David gave a bitter smile. "That's what I thought too. But most translation agencies wanted certified translators with American credentials. The few opportunities I found paid very little and were irregular. I needed steady income to pay rent and buy food." Robert was starting to feel ashamed. Here was a man with extraordinary qualifications working for minimum wage in his building, and Robert had never even noticed him until last night. "So you've been cleaning offices for 3 years?" "Yes, sir. It's honest work and it pays the bills. I work the night shift here, and during the day I do freelance translation work when I can find it." "The phone calls you heard last night, those were some of my regular clients." "What kind of clients?" "Different kinds. I help a businessman in China with his correspondence. I tutor a student in France who's studying African literature." I translate documents for a small company in Brazil. There's a family in Germany whose children I help with their homework via video calls. Robert was amazed. You're running your own translation business while working full-time as a janitor? It's not really a business, sir. It's just a way to use my skills and earn a little extra money. Most of my clients found me through word of mouth in various immigrant communities. Robert leaned forward in his chair. David, can I ask you something personal? Are you happy doing this work? David paused for a long time before answering. Happiness is a luxury I can't afford to think about much, sir. I'm grateful to have work and to be safe, but... He trailed off, but what? But sometimes I lie awake during the day, and I think about the lectures I used to give. I think about the research I was doing on how languages influence cultural understanding. I had plans to write books, to contribute something meaningful to the world. Now I spend my nights emptying trash cans and my days struggling to stay awake for translation calls. The sadness in David's voice hit Robert harder than he expected. Have you tried to get your credentials recognized since you've been here? Many times, sir. The process requires transcripts from my original university, but the building was destroyed in the war. I need letters of recommendation from professors, but most of them fled the country or died. I need to take expensive exams and complete additional coursework. It's a catch-22 situation. I need money to get my credentials recognized, but I need recognized credentials to get a job that pays enough money. Robert sat in silence for a moment, processing everything David had told him. The conversations I heard last night, they weren't just casual chats, were they? No, sir. The man in Beijing is an economics professor who consults for international companies. He sometimes asks my opinion on trade policy between China and Africa. The woman in Paris is writing her master's thesis on post-colonial African literature. I help her understand the cultural context of the book she's studying. And the others? The businessman in Madrid is expanding his company into Latin American markets. I help him understand cultural differences between Spain and Mexico. The family in Germany has 2 teenagers who are struggling with advanced mathematics and science. I tutor them in German because it helps them understand the concepts better in their native language. Robert was beginning to see the full picture. David wasn't just speaking different languages. He was providing expert-level consultation in multiple fields to people around the world, all while working as a night janitor. David, what would your ideal job look like? David's eyes lit up for the first time during their conversation. I would love to work in international relations again, sir. Maybe helping companies understand different cultures and communicate across language barriers. Or teaching, if I could get my credentials recognized. I miss having intellectual conversations with colleagues who share my interests. Robert nodded slowly. An idea was forming in his mind, but he needed to think it through carefully. David, I want to ask you something unusual. Tomorrow morning, I have another meeting with those Japanese investors. Our regular translator called in sick this morning, and we're scrambling to find a replacement. Would you be willing to help us out? David looked shocked. Sir, I appreciate the offer, but I don't have any certification in business translation. I wouldn't want to cost you an important deal. You speak Japanese fluently, don't you? Yes, sir. I lived in Japan for 6 months during my doctoral research. And you understand business and economics? Yes, sir. That was part of my academic background. Robert stood up. Then you're more qualified than most of the translators we usually hire. This isn't charity, David. I need someone good, and based on what I heard last night, you're exactly what we need. David looked uncertain. What about my cleaning duties? Take the day off. I'll arrange for someone else to cover your shift. This is a business meeting that could be worth $50 million to our company. If you help us succeed, I promise it will be worth your time. David sat quietly for a moment, then nodded slowly. All right, sir. I'll do my best. Good. The meeting is at 10 a.m. tomorrow. Do you have a business suit? David looked embarrassed. I have one suit, sir. It's a few years old, but it's clean. That's perfect. Meet me in the lobby at 9:45 tomorrow morning. Robert paused. And David? Don't worry about impressing anyone. Just be yourself. I have a feeling that's going to be more than enough. As Robert walked back to the elevator, he felt excited for the first time in months. He had no idea if his plan would work, but he knew he had to try. Tomorrow's meeting was going to be very interesting. David barely slept that day. He kept staring at his one good suit hanging on the back of his apartment door. It was navy blue, bought 5 years ago for job interviews that never led anywhere. The fabric was still in good condition, but it reminded him of all the disappointments he'd faced since arriving in America. He lived in a small studio apartment in a neighborhood where most of the residents were immigrants like himself. The walls were thin, and he could hear his neighbor's television through the wall. But today, the familiar sounds of his building felt different. Today felt like it might change everything. David spent the morning reviewing business terminology in Japanese. He wanted to make sure he was prepared for any technical language that might come up during the meeting. He also practiced pronunciation for financial terms, knowing that precision would be crucial in a high-stakes negotiation. At 9:30 a.m., David stood outside the Tech Vision Industries building, wearing his navy suit and carrying a small notebook. He had written down key phrases and cultural points that might be relevant to the meeting. His hands were slightly shaking, not from nervousness about the language skills, but from the weight of the opportunity. Robert Harrison appeared in the lobby at exactly 9:45, looking confident in an expensive charcoal gray suit. When he saw David, his face broke into a genuine smile. "David, you look perfect. Ready for this?" "Yes, sir. I've prepared as much as possible given the short notice." As they walked toward the elevator, Robert filled David in on the background of the meeting. The lead investor is Mr. Tanaka. He's been in business for 40 years and values respect and precision above everything else. They're considering a partnership that would help us expand our technology into Asian markets. "What kind of technology, sir?" "Software for managing international supply chains. It's complex stuff, but the potential market in Asia is enormous." David nodded, already thinking about how to explain technical concepts in a way that would resonate with Japanese business culture. "Mr. Harrison, may I suggest something?" "Of course. In Japanese business culture, it's important to acknowledge the wisdom and experience of senior partners before presenting new ideas. Mr. Tanaka will expect to be treated as the honored guest, not just another client." Robert looked impressed. "I hadn't thought about that. What else should I know?" Japanese investors often ask questions that seem indirect, but they're testing your character and long-term thinking. They care more about building relationships than making quick profits. The elevator reached the 40th floor, where Tech Vision's main conference room was located. Through the glass walls, David could see 3 Japanese men in dark suits sitting at a long table. They looked serious and formal, exactly what he had expected. "Mr. Harrison," David said quietly as they approached the conference room, "would it be all right if I introduced myself in Japanese first? It shows respect for their language and culture." "Absolutely. Take the lead on introductions." Robert opened the conference room door and all 3 Japanese men stood up immediately. David stepped forward and bowed appropriately, speaking in fluent Japanese. "Good morning. I am David Osman, and I will be assisting with translation today. It is an honor to meet such distinguished businessmen." The oldest man, who David assumed was Mr. Tanaka, looked surprised and pleased. He responded in Japanese, "Your pronunciation is excellent. Where did you learn our language?" "I had the privilege of studying in Tokyo for several months during my university research. I have great respect for Japanese culture and business practices." Mr. Tanaka smiled for the first time since David had entered the room. "Please let us sit down and begin." As the meeting progressed, David quickly realized that his role was much more complex than simple translation. The Japanese investors spoke excellent English, but they occasionally switched to Japanese when discussing sensitive points among themselves. David was able to provide Robert with crucial insights into their real concerns and interests. 20 minutes into the meeting, Mr. Tanaka raised a complicated question about data security in international markets. The technical terms were challenging, but David not only translated accurately, he also explained the cultural context behind the question. "Mr. Tanaka is asking about data security," David told Robert. "But what he's really concerned about is whether your company understands the importance of trust in long-term business relationships. In Japan, data security isn't just a technical issue, it's a matter of honor and respect between partners." Robert's eyes widened slightly. He hadn't understood the deeper meaning behind the question, but David's explanation helped him respond in a way that addressed both the technical and cultural aspects. "Please tell Mr. Tanaka that we view data security as the foundation of trust between partners," Robert said. "We don't just protect data because it's required by law, but because protecting our partners' information is protecting their honor." David translated this response. and Mr. Tanaka nodded approvingly. The other two Japanese investors exchanged glances that suggested they were impressed. As the meeting continued, David found himself doing more than just translating words. He was translating cultures, helping both sides understand not just what was being said, but why it was being said and how it should be interpreted. When the Japanese team took a short break to discuss among themselves, they spoke in rapid Japanese, assuming that only David would understand them. David listened carefully but maintained a neutral expression, taking notes that he would share with Robert later. "They're impressed with the technology," David whispered to Robert during the break, "but they're still concerned about whether your company has the patience for the Japanese decision-making process." Mr. Tanaka just told his colleagues that most American companies want answers too. Quickly. What should I do? When they come back, don't ask for a decision today. Instead, ask what additional information they need to make the best decision for their company. Show them that you respect their process. When the meeting resumed, Robert followed David's advice perfectly. "Mr. Tanaka, we don't expect a decision today. This partnership is too important to rush. What additional information can we provide to help you make the best decision for your company?" Mr. Tanaka looked genuinely surprised and pleased. He spoke in Japanese to his colleagues, then turned back to Robert. "This is very refreshing, Mr. Harrison. Most American companies pressure us for immediate answers." The atmosphere in the room shifted noticeably. The Japanese investors became more relaxed and began asking detailed questions about TechVision's long-term strategy and company values. David translated not just their words but their tone and body language, giving Robert insights that went far beyond the literal conversation. Near the end of the meeting, Mr. Tanaka asked a question that caught everyone off guard. He spoke directly to David in Japanese. "Mr. Osman, what is your opinion of this partnership? Do you believe TechVision is a company that understands international business?" David realized that Mr. Tanaka was testing him. He could give a diplomatic non-answer, or he could provide his honest professional assessment. He chose honesty. "Mr. Tanaka, I have observed TechVision's approach to this partnership, and I believe they are genuinely committed to understanding their international partners." Mr. Harrison specifically sought cultural guidance to ensure this meeting would be respectful and productive. "This suggests a company that values relationships over quick profits." Mr. Tanaka nodded slowly, then turned to Robert. "Mr. Harrison, your translator is very wise. We are prepared to move forward with detailed negotiations." Robert could barely contain his excitement, but he maintained his composure. "We are honored by your confidence, Mr. Tanaka." After the Japanese investors left, Robert turned to David with an expression of amazement and gratitude. "David, that was incredible. You didn't just translate, you saved this deal. I would have made a dozen cultural mistakes without your guidance." David felt a sense of satisfaction he hadn't experienced in years. "I'm glad I could help, sir." "Help? You were amazing. The way you explained the cultural context behind their questions, the way you guided my responses, the way you handled Mr. Tanaka's direct question to you. That was the work of a seasoned international business consultant, not a translator." Robert pulled out his phone and made a quick call to his assistant. "Cancel my afternoon meetings. I need to have a longer conversation with David." David felt his heart racing. "Sir, is everything all right?" "Everything is perfect, David. But I think we need to talk about your future." Robert led David to his office on the 50th floor. The view of the city was breathtaking, but David found himself focusing on Robert's expression. There was something different about the way the CEO was looking at him now. Something that suggested this conversation was going to be unlike anything David had experienced since arriving in America. "David, sit down. I have a question for you, and I want you to think carefully before you answer." David sat in one of the leather chairs facing Robert's desk, his mind racing with possibilities. If money wasn't an issue, if credentials weren't an issue, if you could design your ideal job, Scratch, what would you want to do? David paused, thinking about how to answer honestly without sounding unrealistic. "I would want to help companies like yours succeed in international markets, sir. Not just by translating languages, but by translating cultures. I would want to help prevent the misunderstandings that destroy business relationships and create opportunities for genuine partnerships." Robert leaned forward in his chair. "What if I told you that I want to offer you exactly that job?" David's mouth went dry. "Sir, I don't understand." David, what happened in that meeting today was extraordinary. You have a combination of skills that most companies would pay enormous amounts of money to access. You understand languages, cultures, business, and diplomacy. You're exactly what TechVision needs as we expand internationally. David felt like the room was spinning. Mr. Harrison, I appreciate what you're saying, but I'm a janitor. I don't have the credentials or experience for that kind of position. Robert smiled. David, forget about credentials for a moment. You just helped me secure a $50 million partnership. You demonstrated more business skill in 2 hours than most of my executives show in a year. Results matter more than credentials. David stared at Robert, hardly daring to believe what he was hearing. After 15 years of struggling, of being overlooked, of watching his potential waste away, someone was finally seeing what he could do. What exactly are you offering, sir? Robert's smile grew wider. I'm offering you the chance to change your life, David, and maybe change our company in the process. Robert opened a folder on his desk and pulled out a sheet of paper. David, I want to offer you the position of Director of International Relations. Your salary would be $120,000 per year, plus bonuses based on the success of international partnerships you helped develop. David felt like he couldn't breathe. $120,000 was more money than he had ever imagined earning in America. It was 10 times what he made cleaning offices, sir. I don't know what to say. Don't say anything yet. Let me explain what the job would involve. Robert stood up and walked to the window overlooking the city. TechVision is expanding into 12 new international markets over the next 2 years. We need someone who can help us understand these markets, communicate effectively with potential partners, and avoid the cultural mistakes that have cost us deals in the past. David tried to process what he was hearing. What would my specific responsibilities be? You would travel to potential partner companies and help negotiate deals. You would train our executives on cultural differences in different markets. You would review our international communications to make sure we're sending the right message. Essentially, you would be our expert on how to do business respectfully and effectively around the world. Robert turned back to face David. Based on what I saw today, you're already more qualified for this job than anyone else we could hire. You understand business, you speak multiple languages, and you have the cultural knowledge we desperately need. David felt overwhelmed. Mr. Harrison, this is incredibly generous, but I have concerns. What kind of concerns? I'm worried about being seen as a charity case. I don't want people to think I got this job because of my background story, rather than my qualifications. I want to earn this position. Robert nodded approvingly. I respect that, David. And I have a proposal that might address your concerns. Take this job on a trial basis. 6 months. If you excel in the role, which I believe you will, then the position becomes permanent. If for any reason it doesn't work out, I'll help you find a position with another company that recognizes your skills. David thought about this carefully. What happens to my night shift job during the trial period? You'll start Monday as Director of International Relations. I'll arrange for someone else to cover your cleaning duties. David, you'll never have to work as a janitor again unless you choose to. The weight of this statement hit David hard. For 3 years, he had gone to sleep every morning knowing that when he woke up, he would spend another night emptying trash cans and mopping floors. The routine had become so familiar that he had almost stopped imagining any other kind of life. Mr. Harrison, can I ask you something? Of course. Why are you doing this? Yesterday, you didn't even know I existed. Today, you're offering to change my life. What's your motivation? Robert sat back down and considered the question seriously. That's a fair question, David. Honestly, I'm doing this partly because it's the right thing to do, but mostly because it's good business. You have skills that my company needs. The partnership we secured today is worth $50 million. If you can help us succeed in other international markets the way you helped us today, this will be the best investment TechVision has ever made. David appreciated Robert's honesty. What about other employees? Won't they resent someone jumping from janitor to director? Some might, Robert admitted. But your results will speak for themselves. And David, this isn't charity. I'm not promoting you because I feel sorry for you. I'm promoting you because you're the most qualified person for this job that I've ever met. Robert opened another folder and pulled out what looked like a contract. I had our legal team draft this while we were talking. It outlines everything we've discussed. Take it home, read it carefully, and let me know your decision by Friday. David took the contract with shaking hands. The document was thick and official-looking with the TechVision logo at the top. Just seeing his name on a contract for a professional position made him feel emotional. "Sir, I need to ask about one more thing. The people I tutor and help with translations, they depend on me. I don't want to abandon them. David, as Director of International Relations, you'll have flexibility in your schedule. If you want to continue helping those people, that's entirely up to you. In fact, it might make you even better at your job here." David stood up, still holding the contract. "Mr. Harrison, I don't know how to thank you for this opportunity. Don't thank me yet. Prove that I made the right decision. Show me that the man I saw in that meeting today is exactly the person Tech Vision needs." As David walked toward the door, Robert called out to him, "David, one more thing. Tomorrow I want you to attend our weekly executive meeting. I want the other directors to meet you and hear about your background. You'll be working closely with them, so it's important they understand what you bring to the team." David felt a moment of panic. Should I prepare a presentation? No presentation necessary. Just be yourself. Tell them about your experience and your vision for international business. Trust me, after what I witnessed today, they're going to be impressed. David left Robert's office and walked slowly to the elevator. The building looked completely different to him now. These weren't just hallways he cleaned at night. They were the corridors of his new professional home. As he rode the elevator down, David thought about calling his clients to tell them the news. His friend in Beijing, the student in Paris, the businessman in Madrid, the family in Germany. They had supported him through the hardest years of his life, believing in his abilities when no one else would. But first, he needed to call his sister in Toronto. She was the only family member he had managed to stay in contact with since leaving Somalia. She had been worried about him for years, knowing that he was wasting his education and skills. David stepped outside into the afternoon sunshine and pulled out his phone. His sister answered after 3 rings. "David, why are you calling so early? Don't you usually sleep during the day?" "Amina, sit down. I have something to tell you." "What's wrong? Are you okay?" "Nothing's wrong. Everything is right. I just got offered a job as Director of International Relations at a major technology company." There was silence on the other end of the line. "Amina, are you there?"
David, are you serious?
How did this happen? David spent 20 minutes telling his sister the entire story, from Robert overhearing his phone calls to the successful meeting with the Japanese investors. Amina cried with joy and pride, knowing how long her brother had been waiting for someone to recognize his potential. "I'm so proud of you, David. Our parents would be so proud too. I haven't taken the job yet. I need to read the contract and make sure this is real." "It's real, David. You've been preparing for this opportunity your whole life. You just didn't know when it would come." After hanging up with his sister, David walked slowly back to his apartment. The neighborhood looked the same, but David felt like a different person walking through it. The small Ethiopian restaurant where he sometimes ate dinner, the laundromat where he washed his clothes, the corner store where he bought groceries, these places had been his entire world for 3 years. Soon he would be traveling to different countries, staying in hotels, eating in business-class restaurants. Back in his studio apartment, David spread the contract out on his small kitchen table. The legal language was complex, but the terms were exactly what Robert had described. The salary was real. The job description matched what they had discussed. There were even provisions for professional development and continuing education. As David read through the contract, he thought about the path that had brought him to this moment. 15 years ago, he had lost everything: his career, his home, his sense of identity. He had arrived in America with nothing but hope and determination. For years, that hope had been tested. He had faced rejection after rejection, had watched less qualified people get opportunities he deserved, had gone to sleep night after night wondering if he would ever be able to use his education again. But he had never given up. He had continued learning, continued helping others, continued believing that someday someone would see his potential. Tonight, someone finally had. David picked up a pen and turned to the signature page of the contract. Then he paused. This moment felt too important to rush. He wanted to savor it, to remember exactly how it felt to have his life change completely in the space of a single day. He thought about his former students in Somalia and how proud they would be to know their professor had found a way to rebuild his career. He thought about his parents who had sacrificed so much to give him an education, and how they would have celebrated this moment. Most of all, he thought about the young refugees who were arriving in America every day. carrying dreams and qualifications that the world couldn't see yet. Maybe his story would give them hope that their time would come too. David signed his name at the bottom of the contract. As he set the pen down, he realized he was crying. But for the first time in 15 years, they were tears of joy. Tomorrow he would begin a new chapter of his life. Tomorrow he would walk into TechVision Industries not as a janitor, but as a director. Tomorrow he would start proving that sometimes the most extraordinary people are hiding in the most ordinary places, waiting for someone to notice them. David folded the signed contract carefully and placed it in an envelope. On Monday morning he would deliver it to Robert Harrison and begin the job he had been preparing for his entire life. 6 months later, David stood in the same conference room where he had first helped with the Japanese partnership. But everything had changed. The room was full of executives from TechVision's partner companies around the world, and David was leading the meeting. "Ladies and gentlemen," David said in English, then repeated in Spanish, German, and Mandarin, "Thank you for joining us for our quarterly international partnership review." Robert Harrison sat at the far end of the table, watching with pride as David smoothly managed discussions between partners who spoke different languages and came from completely different business cultures. In 6 months, David had transformed not just his own life, but the entire international division of TechVision. The numbers spoke for themselves. Since David joined the company, TechVision had successfully entered 8 new international markets. International revenue had increased by 60%. More importantly, their international partners consistently praised the company for its cultural sensitivity and professional communication. David had exceeded every expectation Robert had when he offered him the job. But the changes went far beyond business metrics. After the meeting ended, David walked with Robert back to his office. Their relationship had evolved from CEO and employee to something closer to trusted colleagues and friends. The partnership with the German manufacturing company is moving faster than expected, David reported. They're impressed with our understanding of their quality standards and decision-making processes. We should have a signed agreement within 2 weeks. And the potential deal in Brazil? More complex. They need more time to build trust, which is normal in Brazilian business culture. I'm planning a trip to São Paulo next month to meet with their executives face-to-face. Personal relationships are crucial in that market. Robert shook his head in amazement. David, do you realize what you've accomplished in 6 months? David smiled. I've been thinking about that a lot lately. This job has given me something I lost 15 years ago. The feeling that my knowledge and skills matter. They more than matter. You've become the most valuable member of our executive team. It was true. David's success had been so dramatic that other companies had started trying to recruit him. Just last week, a major consulting firm had offered him a position at twice his current salary. David had politely declined. TechVision had given him a chance when no one else would, and he wasn't going anywhere. But David's impact extended beyond TechVision's offices. Word of his story had spread through Silicon Valley's business community. Robert had been invited to speak at conferences about recognizing hidden talent and avoiding unconscious bias in hiring. Other companies had started examining their own employment practices, wondering what exceptional people they might be overlooking. David had also used his platform to help other immigrants and refugees. He had started a monthly workshop for foreign professionals who were struggling to get their skills recognized in America. He helped them navigate the credential validation process, practice for job interviews, and connect with potential employers. I have some news, Robert said as they reached his office. The board of directors met yesterday to review your performance during the trial period. David felt a moment of nervousness. Even though he knew his results had been excellent, they were unanimous. David, they want to make your position permanent, with a promotion to Vice President of International Relations and a salary increase to $160,000 per year. David sat down heavily in one of Robert's chairs. Vice President? Robert, 6 months ago I was emptying your trash can, and now you're one of the most important executives in the company. David, you've earned this promotion through results, not sympathy. That evening, David returned to his apartment, which he had kept despite his increased salary. He liked the neighborhood and the reminder of where he had come from, but he had made some changes. The walls were now covered with photos from his business, trips and certificates from the professional development courses TechVision had sponsored for him. David pulled out his phone and made his weekly calls to his clients around the world. Some of them had become friends over the years, and they had all celebrated his professional success. His conversation with the economics professor in Beijing had evolved. They now discussed David's first-hand observations of international business trends. The student in Paris had graduated and was starting her own consulting company, using some of the strategies David had taught her. The businessman in Madrid had successfully expanded into 3 Latin American countries, partly due to David's cultural guidance. After finishing his calls, David sat at his kitchen table and opened his laptop. He was working on a book about cross-cultural business communication, something he had dreamed of writing for years. A major publisher had already expressed interest in the project. The book was important to David because it represented the completion of a circle. 15 years ago, he had been forced to abandon his academic research. Now he was contributing to the field again, but with a unique perspective that combined theoretical knowledge with practical business experience. David's phone rang. It was Robert. "David, I'm sorry to bother you at home, but I just got a call from the Japanese partnership. Mr. Tanaka specifically requested that you lead the negotiations for their expansion into Southeast Asian markets. They trust your judgment and want you to be their primary contact." David smiled. Mr. Tanaka had become more than a business partner over the past months. He had become a mentor who often sought David's advice on cultural issues affecting his own international business. "I'd be honored to work with them again, Robert. There's something else. The CEO of Samsung heard about your work from Mr. Tanaka. They want to meet with you next month about a potential partnership in Africa. David, you're becoming internationally recognized as an expert in cross-cultural business." After hanging up, David walked to his window and looked out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, other refugees and immigrants were working night shifts, cleaning offices, driving taxis, washing dishes, all while carrying advanced degrees and extraordinary skills that the world couldn't see. David thought about the janitor who might be working in TechVision's building right now, the person who had replaced him on the night shift. Did that person speak multiple languages? Did they have a PhD in engineering or medicine or literature? How many more David Osmonds were out there, waiting for someone to notice their potential? This question had become David's personal mission. He had started working with refugee resettlement organizations to identify highly skilled immigrants who were working below their qualifications. He helped them prepare for professional interviews and connected them with companies that were learning to look beyond traditional credentials. David had also convinced Robert to create an internship program specifically for immigrants and refugees with advanced degrees. TechVision now employed 3 former refugees in professional positions, including a former Syrian doctor who had become their head of medical technology research. The following week, David received an invitation that surprised him. The University of California had asked him to give a guest lecture about international business and cultural communication. Standing in front of a classroom again felt like coming full circle. "Many of you will graduate and work for companies that do business around the world," David told the students. "You'll discover that success in international business isn't just about speaking different languages or understanding different laws. It's about recognizing that every culture has its own way of building trust, making decisions, and defining success." After the lecture, a young Somali student approached David. "Professor Osman, I heard your story. My family came here as refugees 5 years ago. I'm studying computer science, but sometimes I worry that companies won't see past my accent or my background." David looked at the young man and saw himself 15 years earlier, intelligent, ambitious but uncertain about his place in America. "Let me tell you something," David said. "Your background isn't a disadvantage, it's your secret weapon. You understand things that other people don't understand. You speak languages that other people don't speak. You see the world from perspectives that other people have never considered. The right company will recognize that these differences make you more valuable, not less valuable." The student's eyes lit up with hope. "How do I find the right company?" "You don't just find them," David said with a smile. "You help create them. You work hard, you prove your value, and you change people's minds about what talent looks like. That's what I did, and that's what you can do too." As David drove home that evening, he reflected on the journey that had brought him to this point. The night he met Robert in the break room, he never could have imagined that his life would change so dramatically. He had been resigned to spending his career in jobs that wasted his potential. But sometimes, David realized, the most important moments in life happen when we least expect them. Sometimes, the person who changes our life is someone we've never met, who happens to be in the right place at the right time to witness something extraordinary. Robert had seen something in David that night, something that dozens of employers had missed over the years. But Robert had done more than just recognize David's potential. He had been willing to take a risk on it. David pulled into his parking space and sat in his car for a moment, thinking about tomorrow. He had a video conference with potential partners in South Korea, followed by a strategy meeting about expanding into African markets. In the afternoon, he would review applications for TechVision's refugee internship program. It was exactly the kind of day David had dreamed about during those long nights when he pushed his cleaning cart through empty hallways. A day when his knowledge mattered, when his skills were valued, when his work made a difference. David got out of his car and walked toward his apartment building. His neighbor, Mrs. Chen, was sitting on the front steps as she did every evening. "David," she called out in English mixed with Mandarin. "How was your day?" David responded in fluent Mandarin, asking about her grandchildren and her husband's health. Mrs. Chen always smiled when David spoke to her in her native language. She had told him once that it made her feel less alone in America. As David climbed the stairs to his apartment, he thought about how many small moments of connection like this happened every day, when people from different cultures found ways to understand each other, despite language barriers and different backgrounds. These moments of human connection were what made his work meaningful. Every successful business partnership he helped create was really about helping people from different worlds find common ground and mutual respect. David unlocked his apartment door and stepped inside. On his kitchen table was a framed photo from the day he signed his first major international deal as vice president. He was shaking hands with executives from 5 different countries, and everyone in the photo was smiling. Below the photo was a letter that had arrived that morning. It was from a young refugee in Germany who had read an article about David's story. The letter was written in perfect English, and the young man explained that he was a former engineer from Syria who was currently working as a delivery driver while trying to get his credentials recognized. "Your story gives me hope," the letter said. "It reminds me that my current job doesn't define my potential, and that someday someone will see what I can really do." David sat down and immediately began writing a response. He wanted to encourage the young engineer and offer practical advice about navigating the credential recognition process. But mostly, he wanted to tell him what Robert Harrison had taught David 6 months ago, that extraordinary people are often hidden in ordinary places, waiting for someone to notice them. Sometimes, David wrote, the most important thing we can do is believe in our own potential, even when the world can't see it yet. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, we meet someone who is willing to take a chance on that potential. David finished the letter and sealed it in an envelope. Tomorrow he would mail it to Germany, continuing a chain of hope and opportunity that had started in a break room at midnight. When a CEO happened to overhear a janitor speaking 9 languages, the circle was complete, but it was also just beginning.